Mr. Schwartz, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me. In the interest of time, I'll be very quick. I'll turn on my New York here. They can't handle it in Virginia, but I know Montgomery can handle it fast. Alex Posorski on my staff, and I have met with all of you, I think, or your staffs. We've spent many an hour observing the task force, and we are very, very impressed by this county's commitment to next generation transit at all levels. The Coalition for Smarter Growth has been around since 1997 now. We were formed by the major conservation groups in the region to address where and how we grow, and these intersecting issues of housing, transportation, land use, and the environment. Certainly, we were latecomers as compared to what Montgomery County has done over the years with your national reputation for early planning initiatives, including wedges and corridors, the Ag Reserve, TDRs, downtown Bethesda, Kentlands, King Farm, and of course MPDUs. I'm going to mention those just briefly in the sense that back in 2010 there was an education task force or think tank report that said low-income students in Montgomery County perform better when they attended affluent elementary schools instead of ones with higher concentrations of poverty. Economic integration is a powerful but neglected school reform tool. If there's nothing more important than that, there is really nothing more important than you can accomplish through transit and transit-oriented development and your mixed-income walkable communities than these gains in education that you're seeing for all levels of your community. I can't think of any better kudo there than that. You followed this with the Silver Spring Revival, the expansion of the MPDU program, and a renewed attention to the Ag Reserve. And really, it's in the last couple of years that I'm seeing this really strong focus on transit-oriented development, the Purple Line, the White Flint Plan, the CR Zone, and now the RTV proposal. Why are transit and TOD so important? Well, we showed first on the transportation side, our partners did in a report called Network of Livable Communities back in 1996, that it performs better than our regional highway network alone, and it particularly is important for reducing the amount we have to drive, and it actually improves highway performance. Similar studies here in Montgomery County showed the same thing, that transit-oriented development, east-west transit links, better jobs housing balances were the most effective way to address traffic. Council of Government studies have shown that again and again, and now they're also showing that it reduces our CO2 emissions. The RTV offers the opportunity to address these transportation issues that you face, to keep you competitive, improve access to jobs for all members of your workforce. And certainly transit and TOD have been recognized in the Region Forward Compact signed by all 22 COG jurisdictions as the best way to handling growth, addressing traffic, and improving equitable access to jobs and housing. We agree that investing in with the county executive, that investing in the next generation of transit is one of the most important economic competitiveness tools that you can do, investments that you can do. These transit and transit-oriented development communities are essential to meeting growing market demand from a changing demographic. You have more young workers in the millennial cohort and downsizing empty nesters and retirees who are demanding these types of communities and flocking to them, as we're seeing here in Washington, in the Washington, D.C. area. I was impressed by the number of retirees and empty nesters who were among your top supporters for the White Flint Plan. I mean, that shows a significant shift in thinking and desire. And they're looking for walkability. They're looking for convenient access to services. These are the largest cohorts of our population. They're estimated to be already 40% of the market in terms of the market for new urbanist communities, and that's only going to grow. I won't even get into the health benefits of these more walkable communities. You have a particular advantage in that you have the ability to create both great transit-oriented development and nearby access to parks and the Ag Reserve. I think that's a win-win. When you're trying to attract young, highly mobile tech employees, you need to offer both vibrant urban centers and the extensive recreational opportunities that good open space protection offers. You're competing for these employees with Boulder, Colorado, Seattle, Portland, Vancouver, Austin, Texas, you name it. These are mobile people. They tend to rent more often because they want to be mobile, and they can go to where the jobs are. They have their choice often where they can go, and they are looking for the place with the hippest neighborhoods, the coolest coffee shops, and the places they can mountain bike, kayak, and so forth. It's on more than one occasion I've talked to weekend bike riders, and they've said they've given up on Loudoun County because of its leapfrog sprawl, and they're flocking to your Ag Reserve because you protected it. And those are people who are also investing in your economy. There is an economic advantage to this by creating options to the consumption of oil, whether it's foreign or domestic. Economists this spring were showing that we were seeing a slowdown in consumer spending as oil prices went up. We didn't have the disposable income to spend on other items. Local food, local goods, local services, or investing in a business or your own education. So instead of spending it on energy for transportation, let's create more efficient land use and transportation. Tax base. I don't know the figures for Montgomery County, but much smaller Arlington County has shown that the two metro corridors generate 50% of its tax base on just 11.6% of its land. And there's a benefit to all the neighborhoods. All the suburban neighborhoods of the county benefit from the investments in rec centers, libraries, parks, traffic calming, and so forth that are made possible because of the net economic and revenue gain from transit-oriented development. Economist Joe Minicozy, in looking at mixed-use compact development as compared to suburban strip development, has shown it provides many times the tax revenue per square foot, as does a more traditional strip development. You avoid inter-suburban decline. And that's where I think the purple line is particularly important. This isn't just about Prince George's County. I think as you have older housing stock, as do all the older inner suburbs of this country, one of the ways to keep that smaller, older housing stock competitive and attractive to people of higher incomes is to just invest in key services and convenient, impressive services like a purple line or an RTV for those communities. That along with, of course, the other walkable amenities that you can add to a community. We think adding the RTV network to the Metrorail and Purple Line will help to continue to attract new young families to your older suburban neighborhoods. It's a green solution. You're a green county. You've been leading on green for years, whether it's the Ag Reserve and your Stream Valley Parks, recycling, energy-efficient building, green power. But to be a leader today and to fight climate change, one of the most effective things you can do is transit and TOD. Green energy-efficient buildings and walkable, bikeable, transit-oriented development will address 80% of the energy consumption in the U.S. And the climate emissions that come with it. In both Smart Growth America's Growing Cooler report and our own Cool Communities report, we showed that mixed-use walkable transit communities in regionally accessible locations, which really are the really high-capacity transit lines that you can build, provide the greatest CO2 reductions. Our recommendations going forward with your network, first of all, I think it's important to note that now that the region has recognized and Montgomery County is doing so much on transit-oriented development, we're doing great on the development, but now we have to put the T back into TOD. And I think that's what we're finding throughout the region. And that's going to be an important part of the Coalition for Smarter Growth campaign in the coming year. And we don't pick favorites in terms of transit technologies at the Coalition. We want to see that there is effective service that is frequent, reliable, more often dedicated service, dedicated lane service, no matter what the technology, and then we match the technology to your land use goals for mixed-use walkable communities. We certainly hope that there will be unity of the council, the county executive, and the planning board in this effort, while still asking the hard questions and ensuring that you get the details right. We ask that you demand the best of your transportation and planning staffs in the county, hire the best consultants, and ensure a relentless focus on implementing well-designed TOD in transit. Ask the hard questions, make sure you're getting it right, work effectively with the community, and talk about the stark choice your community faces. Without investment in this type of system and continuing to sprawl outward or to spread out our development and separate the types of things, activities we need to get to, we will choke on our own traffic. And in the past, typically people have fled that traffic, and this is why Tyson's Corner got nervous about its future, just to go to the next place farther out that temporarily had less congestion, and obviously the congestion returned. So for a long-term solution, this offers the best approach. A key is to ensuring that your transportation staff and SHA help you with the dedicated transit right-of-way you need along your road corridors, even in the case where you need to contribute a current driving lane. We have some pretty wide arterials that offer that opportunity. Commit to the vision of a full network to inspire, but I think as the task force has put together a phasing plan, that phasing is important so you can do the most important routes first, the ones that are going to be the most successful. You can draw lessons from each stage and ensure you get the details right. The task force members will talk about all the details about that they're aiming to get right in terms of service performance, so I won't go into those. I will indicate in addition, though, that investments in safe and convenient walking and bicycle access to the stations is going to be critical. And the conservation community, our partners, certainly would like to see that this is an opportunity to retrofit your stormwater management on your linear road corridors while doing this system. We'd also like to see that you add essential links to surrounding jurisdictions, intercept those long-distance commuters, but I'd like to pay focus particular attention on something I wrote to you about a few months ago, which was connecting Tyson's Corner, the Silver Line, to the Red Line in Montgomery County. I can't think of any more important direct transit link to complement and supplement this system. So let me conclude by commending the county executive, the staff, and the transit task force, creating a great vision and a plan for a next generation high-capacity transit network. You have shown a great record of smart growth implementation over the years, and I think this is the right next step for your economic competitiveness and your green sustainability to be a national leader, and for putting the T back into TOD. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Mr. Bennett, share with us some thoughts on the Purple Line.
Certainly. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to comment on the status of the Purple Line project, an integral part of the county's important comprehensive transportation plan. I'm happy to report that the project is alive, in design, and for the moment funded. Preliminary design is well underway. One problem after another is being solved. The MTA team is working hard on the Wisconsin Avenue underpass in Bethesda. You'll receive the Chevy Chase sector plan in the fall. We are hopeful that appropriate intensity will be approved for this important location. The Littonsville service yard appears to have been solved to the satisfaction of most. The route through Silver Spring can be traced between the transit center, best wishes on that, along Bonifant Street, past two new residential buildings, around the library, which is shaped by the location of the Purple Line, now under construction, and down Wayne Avenue, where a station is to be located at Dale Drive after some controversy. The route through Long Branch has triggered an important planning effort to bring the greatest community benefits from the development activity, which will inevitably accompany the line. And Montgomery and Prince George's counties are cooperating to make policies which will bring the least disruptive and most beneficial future to Langley Park. I could go on about Prince George's County. They're doing some excellent planning efforts, particularly on the stations around the university, but we're in Montgomery County. Current activity on the project is funded by the Federal Transit Administration for $107 million through 2014, and from the Maryland Transit Administration for $130 million for the same period. Significantly, you have committed $49.5 million to the Capitol Crescent Trail beside the Purple Line between Bethesda and Silver Spring, with $27.6 million placed in the 6-year capital improvement plan. And you have committed $80.5 million to the south entrance to the Bethesda Metro Station. While some have opposed these capital budget items as merely symbolic, we salute you for including them because it gives our partner funders at the state and federal levels a clear sign that the county is committed to the project. Which brings us to the greatest problem facing the project now, funding at the state level. We had hoped that Governor O'Malley's proposal to convert the state's fixed gasoline tax to a sales tax could have happened in the recent legislature. As you know, it did not. We are deeply concerned about transportation funding in general, and of course, funding for the red and purple lines and the CCT specifically. Purple Line now is initiating and gathering allies in a campaign to alert all state legislators to the importance of this issue so that they will broaden the scope of the second special session in July to include stable transportation funding. We have much to do. Many of our fellow citizens don't know where the line will be located. Many fear the development which inevitably accompanies fixed route transit and which we feel will improve the county substantially. This project is essential on many levels: diversion of commuters out of their cars, placement and service of jobs and housing growth at appropriate locations, and the overall economic vitality of the county for the future. We thank you for your leadership and your support in this effort and look forward to riding with you on the Purple Line before the decade is out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Ms. Balcom, talk to us
Hi.
about the CCT.
Thank you for putting this together. This is very important. And in terms of putting the T in TOD, never is that more important than in the Up County. The Up County was based on transit-oriented development, and the CCT will bring that transit. Just this, basically the stats on the project: 15-mile now BRT based on the governor's LPA from Shady Grove Metro to Clarksburg with 16 stops. Daily ridership about 48,000. Cost estimates are about 800 million. However, there's a new study, the Kittleson Associates study, that will greatly reduce the cost of phase 1. And in terms of the need, the CCT is just a critical component of the development of the Up-County, impacting all the major developments. And to talk about the importance of the CCT, I'm going to just take you on a tour of the line and the various stops, and hopefully soon we can actually ride the track and ride those stops. So the first stop, Shady Grove Metro. The connection to the metro is critical. It's important. The CCT is not intended, nor should it be considered, a commuter rail. The intention of the CCT is not to get people from Frederick to Virginia. That's not the point. That's not to say that some people won't use it for that purpose, but the primary purpose of the CCT is to serve the development along the line, to serve the development in the Up-County, and perhaps one day people would actually think about taking the metro to the Up-County to get on the CCT, to go to the jobs in the Up-County, to have that reverse commute, and that's what the CCT is about. The CCT is an important link between jobs, people, retail, healthcare, education, entertainment, and the metro is that important gateway. So along the way, King Farm, in terms of the residents of King Farm, they can also take the CCT not one stop to the metro, but the other way, to the jobs in the Science City and jobs towards in Germantown. Crown Farm, if you haven't been up there recently, Crown Farm is a major development happening right now. It's a large-scale transit-oriented mixed-use development, 1,200 residents, 300 square feet of commercial space, and the first house is coming online in fall of 2012. I go by there almost daily. The roads are going in, so that project is happening now. Next along the way is the Great Seneca Science Corridor, which is home to Johns Hopkins University, Human Genome Sciences, universities at Shady Grove Adventist Health, and of course the new home of the National Cancer Institute. It includes 6,000 new homes, an additional 10 million square feet of commercial development. That's over what's currently in place and including the pipeline. That equates to roughly 30,000 new jobs in that area. And as the master plan was being developed, it was recognized that we can't add that much density without significantly increasing the transportation infrastructure, and specifically the CCT. The staging requirements are very explicit in that plan. There was a small amount of commercial development available in Stage 1. Stage 1 opened and closed like that. So where we stand right now is before Stage 2 can move forward, and I quote from the master plan, fully funded construction of the CCT from the Shady Grove Metro Station to Metropolitan Grove within the first 6 years of the county's CIP or the state's CTP. So basically what that means is no new commercial development will be approved in that corridor until the CCT is funded. And to further monitor development in that area, Stage 3 won't open until 50% of the project, of the construction is underway, and Stage 4 requires complete operation of the CCT from Shady Grove to Clarksburg. So when the council approved that plan, you understood the importance of transit in that area. And so it was a very bold plan. It's a very exciting plan. It helps us stake our global claim on life sciences here in Montgomery County. And we, of course, need the CCT for that. Moving up, one of a showcase nationally recognized TOD, the Kentlands and the Lakelands, and add to that MedImmune, one of our major employers, and that's a great little TOD corner right there in Montgomery County. And so residents will be able to use the CCT to come and go, but also MedImmune employees can use transit to get right to their doorstep, right at their doorstep. And further, then also the NIST, National Institute for Science and Technology, major employer with a stop right there for employees to take transit. And Metropolitan Grove. This is an area also, if you haven't been up that way, it's really very exciting what's happening at Metropolitan Grove, both on the east and west side of I-270. The Watkins Mill Town Center is a new mixed-use development adding about 1,000 homes, 300,000 square feet of retail, but another 1 million square feet of commercial space. It's a fantastic development, and one of the exciting portions of that, it connects the CCT with the MARC station. So it's a wonderful transit hub. And also really close to my new home. The chamber moved, and we're right by Metropolitan Grove, but you'll get information on that soon. Another important aspect of Watkins Mill is on the other side of 270. Once the Watkins Mill Bridge is built, the CCT will also serve Watkins Mill East, another 225 homes, another 100,000 square feet of retail. Kaiser Permanente is now open. I recommend everybody go and take a tour. It's a fantastic facility. And hopefully someday the 6th District Police Station. And of course, once the interchange is built, that area, Metropolitan Grove, will be the intersection of I-270, the CCT, the MARC train station, and 355. And while today we're talking about transit, I cannot overemphasize the importance of the Watkins Mill interchange and that the bridge being built. And then further up, my hometown, Germantown, one of the fastest growing areas in the state. The growth of Germantown over the past 10 years is staggering, as you all know from the census. And given the 2009 master plan, we expect that growth rate to continue significantly. In the 2009 master plan, we are looking to add another 10 million square feet of commercial, another 9,000 homes, and that's about 45,000 jobs that we're expecting in Germantown over what we have now. That includes pipeline. And of course, to accommodate that growth, there are 3 stops in Germantown. And that development is starting to happen, and we're looking forward to that. We have a great vision for Germantown. You all are a major part of that vision, and so we're looking forward to the transit there. The last stop, for now, is Clarksburg. Right now, the CCT ends at the ComSat building. We really hope that by the time phase one is through, phase 2 gets built, that goes all the way to Clarksburg Town Center. We think it was short-sighted of MTA to stop at ComSat, and that really should go all the way to Clarksburg Town Center. So the status and the timing, of course, the LPA is out. That was a major hurdle for us. MTA will submit the project to FTA under the New Starts program. That package, the introductory package, will go to FTA hopefully this month. And assuming that there's a favorable review, then the New Starts reports will go over in the next year. There's also an opportunity with the new Kittleson report that the project may qualify for small starts money. In the governor's LPA, he's calling for construction to begin fall of 2018 and service to begin in 2020. Clearly that it will not help. Certainly it will help, but we want to see that accelerated a great deal. We want to see that happening much quicker. And as we've said all along, as you've heard all along, the CCT is good to go now more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Malcolm. Thank you for your leadership on this important project. We will now turn to really the principal focus of our conversation this morning, which is to hear from the Transit Task Force and its chair and its great committee chairs with respect to this important initiative. And to just say, Mr. Winston, we are very indebted to the extraordinary amount of time and effort you put into this work. As someone who used to be on a major law firm, the notion of spending the kind of time you spent on this project while trying to continue your service to your law firm, I am sure was not an easy task. in and of itself. So we are very grateful for all your work and for your leadership with respect to this. So why don't we turn it over to you at this point so that you can walk us through this very important initiative.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the council. It's a pleasure to be here, and we appreciate the opportunity. It's the first time anyone has asked me to speak up, Mr. President. It's a pleasure to be here and to have an opportunity to present the highlights of the work of the Transit Task Force over the last 14, 15 months. Before we launch into the substance of that, though, I would be remiss if I didn't express my appreciation to my colleagues on the task force, not just those who are at the table here today. I also noticed that Dan Wilhelm was with us in the audience, and there may be others who have, Francine Waters, there may be others who have come in since I have turned around. This was an extraordinary group of people who worked collegially through a long series of meetings, both as a full task force and as working groups, who contributed a great deal of time and energy and dedicated service to the county, and it was a privilege to work with them. Also, it was a privilege to have the opportunity to work with the ex officio members of the task force from various county agencies and from the State Department of Transportation and the staff of the county and state agencies who were regular attendees and participants in our work. We did not always see eye to eye. We may not always see eye to eye in the future, but I think it's important for the council to know that there was great cooperation. We worked together and learned a great deal from them and respected their service to our community as well. I think today the best way for us to highlight for you the contents of our report is for me to ask three of my colleagues who were chairs of working groups that dealt with significant subjects to make presentations, and then I will wrap things up and we will all be available to you for questions that we'll respond to the best of our ability. Our first presenter is Jonathan Jen, who chaired our working group on system design attributes, and I am sure that you will understand what that means after Jonathan has presented his report. He has also some graphics for you as well. Jonathan.
Welcome, Mr. Jen, and thank you for your contribution.
Thank you. Again, my name is Jonathan Jen. I chair the work group that was Work Group A, the first work group that got underway of the task force talking about the system design and the attributes of the proposed countywide system. I do have remarks written, which I'll submit afterwards, because in the interest of time, I will just really highlight the first perspective out of the six that really helped shape the consideration and the analysis of our work group and how are we going to design and what would be the attributes of such a system. And my first point, and the only one I'll mention at this point in time and turn in my comments later, is what I think our work group found was most instructive as a guideline for us to think about what should be the attributes, what should be the design of this system. It always seemed to come back to a fundamental question that we asked, and I would recommend that maybe you consider the same thing as you consider each of the challenges and opportunities of this system. And that was, as an issue would come up or a question would arise or a challenge we faced, we would ask ourselves, how would the original Metro Rail subway visionaries a half century ago have approached that same type of issue? And what would have been the consequences to the quality and the performance of the Metro Rail subway system that we enjoy today and the customer satisfaction if the ultimately designed Metro Rail subway system would have been changed on account of that particular issue. And every time we found that issue, we found that putting ourselves in the position of what if we were the original designers and engineers and visionaries of the Metro Rail, how would the issue have affected and impacted the quality of the system and the ridership of the system? As you know, when the subway first opened up, it wasn't at full capacity. We know what it's like today. And I think that's instructive because that's essentially what we found answered almost all of our questions. And our work group achieved the unanimity, and the task force itself had unanimously recommended the series of attributes in the system design. Because essentially, you here today are the visionaries of this century's version of a Metro Rail type system, which is the one we're proposing here. So we think it's perfectly appropriate to view it in that way. Because I have about 12,000 words to recite, but not enough, and a picture is worth 1,000 words, I'll be able to go through it on a visual basis of what essentially our work group designed. And we tried it, first and foremost, the attribute that we found was absolutely essential was to have separately dedicated lanes for our RTV vehicles so that they would not have to travel in mixed general traffic. Absent that, we run the risk of compromising the rapid in rapid transit. Now, there are lots of different ways in which to address that. It doesn't necessarily have to be two directional lanes. We have some corridors that do have peak hours in both directions, and those have to be considered. But there are some of our corridors in which the peak direction is a single direction, AM or PM peak period, and so it is possible to have single lane tracks, and then, as you can see, this is a depiction of how it could be handled at a station for that purpose. The idea of the separate dedicated guideways also helps to safely separate RTV lanes in traffic because of the curb differentiation. It enables us in tight physical constraints to have that operating. Among the other attributes is, and again, the focus came on what any good system is going to succeed is the focus on the customer. Make this designed to satisfy the consumer. And doing that, the sleek and stylish rapid transit vehicles, something that people will want to. We want to reach the travelers who are travelers of choice, because the fundamental transformational part of this rapid transit system we seek to achieve is to transform those who are in single occupancy vehicles. The single occupancy vehicle travelers are what takes up the space and slows down our people moving capacity. And to do that, we want to reach the riders of choice. We need to have a transit system with the attributes that will reach those riders who have a choice. So those are among the features that we're looking for, these particular sleek and stylish rapid transit vehicles that provide for easy onboarding and offboarding. The other aspect, one of the interesting characteristics that we found in the study of this opportunity for the county is that we could have dedicated lanes for the RTV vehicles, and in this case we came up with a 160-mile system, but the adaptability of the vehicles allow them to go beyond what might be the guided guideways. And in some ways, depending on where, if we have just off the route, maybe by a quarter of a mile or whatever, a major employer, a major university, a major place where people travel, it can be helpful that we don't necessarily need to make it part of a separate dedicated lane. It could be an exclusive route that is, and in that way, we could easily reach a 200 or 250 mile system when we have those kinds of opportunities. An example of that, I believe, is, for example, universities at Shady Grove would like to be part of the CCT. Well, if we could actually have these kinds of vehicles who are more amphibious and can get off the lines. Also, focusing on the customer okay. Also focusing, thank you. I get it now. Also, focusing on the consumer is the attributes of the station, ideally weather protected. Now, not every station has to be, depending on the ridership and the same, but enables us to have the kind of signature stations, weather protected stations to serve and comfort for the consumer. In order to make sure we maintain the rapid in the rapid, it's important that we have off-vehicle fare collection, real-time data information for the consumer so they know when the RTV is arriving. Those allow for quick on and off and maintain and can turn around a vehicle in a matter of seconds moving past the station. Level platform boarding, just like the Metro Rail, allows for quick embarking and also for handicap accessibility. The capacity of the vehicles, they're articulated vehicles, they're double articulated vehicles. This one, for example, a double articulated vehicle has capacity to up to 185 passengers. One of the studies that we realized was the increased people moving capacity of this system is astounding and can actually enable us to achieve the kinds of people moving capacity that's not just to satisfy us for the next 10 or 15 or 20 years and then we're out of space. It enables us really to create capacity for the next 30, 40, 50, 60 years and beyond. A lane can, by virtue of using shorter headways, as other nations have done and other areas have done, if you get a headway of a minute in between each vehicle at the peak times that we need to now and in many decades into the future. Our roads have an absolute maximum capacity of moving automobiles through an intersection. But the rapid transit vehicles, as our report indicated, and just to give you an example in terms of people moving, trying to be as reasonable in and favoring the highest efficiency of automobile movement through an intersection of about 1,800 vehicles in an hour. 1,800 vehicles in an hour, but if there were no cross-section, if there's a cross-section, about 1,200 vehicles per hour enables about 1,300 people to move through an intersection. The rapid transit system, depending on headways, with that kind of capacity could move thousands and thousands more than what we can do now. It could go to 5,000, it could go to 7,000, it could go to 10,000 people through an intersection. We can build capacity for the future. And the importance of that is, as we know, we're trying and we're hoping in the future to be able to attract major employers as well as the opportunities for those who live and work here to move around. Well, it's important when people are thinking about investing. If imagine a major investor, employer, trying to choose which county or state to move to. They want to see that the county is demonstrating a willingness to invest in the future. This is a bold statement. And we know there are other jurisdictions around the area who are making bold statements about investing in the future many, many decades from now. Montgomery County needs to do the same thing. The final comment I will make is that we understand, and what makes the rapid transit system very, very important as opposed to single transportation projects. Instead of thinking about it as one line versus another or one corridor or versus another, this is a comprehensive system and it's integrated, and it's not, it is a network which is very, very different from the idea of just assembling a number of separate single transportation projects. We are creating a network not only within the RTV network itself, but we are making it so it integrates and is comprehensive with all modes of transportation. It is integrated with walking, biking, zip car, taxi cab, light rail, heavy rail, buses, ride-on buses, all of the modes. The rapid transit system that we're proposing actually creates that linkage to maximize all of them, and each one is improved by virtue of that. So it is really an issue of the whole is so much greater than the sum of the parts. And this is a depiction, for example, not only of how we can coordinate all those separate modes of transportation, but also how we can integrate into the region, and that it's not just isolated to Montgomery County. Now, of course, that's beyond the scope of the Montgomery County Rapid Transit System to design and perhaps finance a integrated regional system that could reach up to Baltimore and down into Northern Virginia. But this is an example how we, in anticipating the necessity to sort of pre-wire our system to connect in, how we could connect in, for example, take a look at that picture, to I-270, to the Beltway, on up to Frederick, over to Prince George's County on 495, up 95 to Baltimore, and across the Beltway into Northern Virginia. We believe that Montgomery County can be the leader in how this regional network, integrated, comprehensive, and transformational can be. And I thank you for all your time and consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jed, for your time. Mr. Chairman?
Mr. President, thank you, Jonathan. The task force also created a working group that it called Routes and Development Sequencing. The purpose of that group was to take those preliminary route systems that had been proposed previously, prior to the existence of the task force, including the route system originally proposed by Council Member Elrich and the route system that was proposed or reviewed in the preliminary feasibility study by Parsons Brinkerhoff, performed for the county, that was completed roughly at the same time the task force came into existence. Using those ideas and studies as starting points, the task force created this working group to look at the issues relating to the kinds of routes that we needed in our system, and also to look at the idea of how would we sequence the build-out of such a network. And in particular, as it relates to the route system itself, as my colleague will describe in a minute, we had a vision that was a little different than what is typically done in the development of BRT, or in our case, RTV systems. And that is that we were not developing a system on a corridor by corridor basis. And this is consistent with what Jonathan Jen was saying. We're developing a system, and there are a variety of reasons for that, and they will, among other things, be covered by Tina Slater, who chaired the task force working group on routes and development sequencing. Tina?
Thank you, Mark. Good morning. I'm Tina Slater. Thank you to President Berliner and the council members for listening to our presentation. I did chair the work group on the routes and phasing, and among the several members we had on our task force, we were very fortunate to have the director of Montgomery County Department of Transportation, Art Holmes, and also Council Member Elrich's Chief of Staff. So we had a lot of good input onto the concepts of where to place these routes. We first looked at the Parsons Brinkerhoff study and pretty much accepted those routes, but what we noticed was that their study looked a little bit like the red line situation that we have today, with everything pointing down south towards the district and very little going across. So we thought that east-west connectivity was very important. Today, if you want to get from Rockville to Wheaton by the metro, you have a very long sort of V shape or U shape to travel. So we wanted to improve the east-west connectivity across the county, and our goal was to provide mobility north and south, east and west, to create this web or this network effect. That was a main goal. Another goal was that the corridors should access a full range of transit. Of course, if this is implemented, ride-on routes would change to funnel into these main corridors. But this RTV system also can provide people a lot of access to metro stations, to MARC stations, and to Purple Line stations. So the benefit of this is that it has a multiplier effect. When people using MARC can get off at a station and then be able to get on the RTV system to get to other destinations, this will perhaps increase the number of people that would be using MARC now that they aren't just sort of getting dumped at a station and have to figure out how to get to another part of the county where currently they can't go. So this multiplier effect should help all the different transit systems. And I guess the third major point is that we didn't want to think of this simply as a transit system for the county, because when people travel in their cars today, or even by transit, they're not cognizant of jurisdictional boundaries. They just get on and go to where they need to go. But of course, we would be limited to the county. However, we wanted to plan this system so that in the future it could reach out into other jurisdictions like Howard County, Frederick County, the district, Prince George's County, because transit has to move people regionally. And with respect to that, I think it was back in December, Councilmember Florine and Councilmember Reamer connected with the District Department of Transportation and said, how come you're running the Georgia Avenue streetcar up to Tacoma Park, D.C. and stopping it there when that's like a little more than a mile away from the Silver Spring Transit Center where a whole lot of people could get on and off and move on to different places. So we want to be thinking that way about shaking hands with other jurisdictions. We did up on the wall, which is too small for anybody to read, is the full-blown route system. It encompasses about 160 miles, and a little more than half of it we would expect to build in phase one. We had to divide the routes into phases for manageable costs, but also manageable construction, so that if one route's being constructed, people have an alternate or adjacent road to use in the meantime. We also wanted to create to honor the network effect, even in phase one, which might just be a little bit more than half of the routes. We want it to go north and south and east and west to give people a flavor or preview of what a complete county network could be. We also wanted to make sure that we are providing access to multicultural and socioeconomic populations, and make sure the RTV is giving access to large employers, to hospitals, to universities, community activity centers, and hopefully several public high schools, because this might offer an opportunity for RTVs to be used in place of school buses in some places. The RTV vehicles would travel in their own special lanes, allowing them to bypass traffic and move people swiftly to their destinations. Good quality transit, if it's good quality, does give people what they want, a way not to waste their time in congested traffic. It could make more people in the county less car dependent. We don't envision everyone giving up their car just because there's an RTV system. However, if you think of our roadways in August, if you want to call that the August effect, it's a little bit easier to get around and drive on the roadways in August because some of the people are out of town and not on the road. We would hope that the RTV system could offer that. With these vehicles traveling in their own lane, they should be going at least as fast as the traffic and probably a whole lot faster, and that might encourage people to people who have a point-to-point commute to leave their car at home, get on the RTV, and have the benefit of a pretty deluxe ride like Jonathan described. Transit would also enable people who can't drive to participate in economic life. Many seniors, and I'm of the baby boomer population, at some point you might not want us or me driving on the road, and it would be useful to have an alternative. And this system could also serve disabled people. It could serve youth who don't have driver's license, and a segment of the economic population that can't afford a car. So I think it would make access and mobility for a lot of groups much better and expand their participation in the economy. I think that's pretty much how I would like to just describe the routes, and we can take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tina. Our next presentation will be by David McDonough, who chaired the Task Force Economic Case Working Group, which was established to study the potential economic impact of a rapid transit vehicle system if developed on our community. And under David's able leadership, the working group brought in additional experts beyond just the consultant and beyond just the members of the working group. And David will now summarize a great deal of complicated work.
Mark, thank you. As Mark mentioned, my name is David McDonough, and I come to you as the chair of the Economic Case Working Group. And I also like the way that Mark said summarize. Succinctness is not my strong suit, so I'm going to start my watch and try to make sure I'm done in 10 minutes. Also like to thank the council for listening to today's presentation. Our task was to review the economic case for a countywide RTV system. And really my number one job was to assemble the best minds we could find to analyze that question and then get out of the way. And we were very, very fortunate to have the group of the people we did. One of the great things about being in DC is you literally can get some of the very best people in the country to be on our committee. As you can see the list, both those who are appointed and those who are subject area experts. We had not only the academics with Dr. Fuller and Dr. Weiss and Mr. Tischer, who are literally some of the brightest people in the country on this topic. We also had the head of planning for WMATA and head of planning for the state. Of course, we also had our council president, Mr. Berliner, which was also a thrill having him on the committee. And in addition, lots of other great committee members, including today, I think we have a few of our members here with us today, including Francine Waters, Mark Winston, and Tom Street, and I hope not missing anyone else here. So what was our process? Our process was, again, following on one of my favorite mentors from Cambridge, was Dr. Landa Polaroid, which is you have to define a problem before you can solve it. And so our process was basically looking back over the last 20 years to see what economic problems exist in the county and how an RTV system would affect it. And I would note that we did see some not very pleasant things in our county's economy. And the point here is not to sort of point fingers on elected officials, because this goes beyond 20 years, but really to let the facts lead us to their own conclusions. I always like George Washington's quote that facts define their own reality. And some of the facts we found were not particularly pleasant, but they are facts we have to deal with. Then we looked at where we are today, and then we looked at the future. And essentially, there were three main theses that came out of the review. Number one, we're in an extremely competitive environment for jobs, both locally, regionally, nationally, and globally. And if you are not prepared to compete, you will lose. Number two, the quality of life for our county's residents depends in very large part on our economic health. I know we're not Detroit, but when you look at places like Detroit, which have no economic base and have no income, and their cusp being taken over by the state, I think it's a fairly safe contention. They don't have much quality of life, but we need to be very mindful of the link between quality of life, jobs, tax base,
and public services. And finally, the third thesis was, as you look at those components, we think RTV is a key element to achieve those components. So the result of this was a study, if I can get this guy to turn. So left click. There we go. Sorry, it took a little while to get there. And let's see if I hold on a second. Well, really, the slide you're just missing is a slide which goes through the study itself, which, again, we're not going to go through in great detail. It's 69 pages, 40 exhibits, 50 reference sources. And I guess it's important to point out, it's really big picture. This is a macroeconomic analysis. We're looking at the major elements in the county. What it is not is a microeconomic analysis. What it is not is a net fiscal analysis. We actually had one of the country's leading experts on fiscal analysis, Paul Tischler, on our committee. And he essentially pointed out to us that if we really wanted to figure out what the net bottom line was for dollars in, dollars out, we would have to examine every single station, 160 miles, every piece of dirt around the stations, what's happening today, what's likely to happen in the next 20 years, figure out every cost for every expense, not close within the realm of what we had to do today. So this is not a net fiscal analysis. It's really more of a macro analysis. And what I'm doing today is just really a synopsis of the synopsis. So if we go to it's really the thesis number one, competition. And I think Michael Porter summarized this very well, and I think we cannot lose sight of this. Where people decide to bring their jobs defines how you will do economically. And how you do economically defines in what revenues you have in your economic situation. And this is actually, as a sidebar, if you want to look at this edition of the Business Review, look at global competition, the county is actually, absent the RTV system, is extremely well positioned to compete globally in our particular sector, the healthcare. Okay, so what's part of the bad news looking backwards? This notion of how are we competing for jobs? Well, if you look at our next door neighbor, Fairfax County, over the last 10 years, you can see we lost 5,300 jobs. They gained 37,000 jobs. So why do we care? Well, back to this link between our economic base, our tax base, and revenues. During that time period, the last few years of that time period, while we had an overall increase in the total assessed value of the properties in the county, we had a 43% decrease in new construction portion of that base. So really, we had very little new blood being added to our tax base. In the last year alone, we had a 33% decrease in new construction as a share of the total tax base. You say, well, you know, this was a bad economy. I guess everyone was doing poorly during this time. It's not the case. Our competitive neighbors across the river had a 1% increase in the new construction portion of their tax base. And we understand that North Virginia has been the beneficiary of 2 wars and the dollars to the death sciences. We understand that. We also understand that our base is really more looking at the life sciences, but we also look at sort of what elements contribute to their strength. And an element is their transit system. And as Jonathan mentioned, coming up with a Silver Line, they're getting even stronger with their transportation system compared to where we are. This guy a minute. This is just some of the data you can look at your leisure, just talking about sort of our declining new construction as a part of our tax base. Wait a second, this got to change again. So thesis number 2, quality of life depends on economic health. And if you look at sort of the notion, which is that economic health is driven by getting new young workers and new jobs, and that will expand the commercial tax base, and that expanded commercial tax base pays for schools, parks, and other county amenities that affect the quality of life. We just talked a minute ago about how we've been relatively weak in the past. I won't repeat those stats. You look at where we are today. We're losing jobs, we're shrinking our tax base, we're getting an aging population and fewer young people. I'm sure everyone's looked at Roland Stanley's work from the 2010 census. It's not a particularly pretty picture. And what does it mean to have a weak future economic health? It means that we have a reduced quality of life or significantly higher property taxes in order to pay for these services. So you look at sort of those factors, downward jobs, declining new construction, aging population, and on top of all that, we have the worst traffic congestion, thank you, in the United States. And I'd like to just call a little bit on one of the guys from Cleveland, the head of the Cleveland Clinic. I thought it had a very nice metaphor. He said that when they're looking at putting together an RTV system in Cleveland, He said, humans need healthy arteries to grow and thrive. Congested arteries are unhealthy. County transportation systems need healthy arteries to grow and thrive, and that's what we need. I go to Tom Tolles as a muse. As you may know, in October 2011, after the Texas Transit Institute came out with a study that we are the #1 worst traffic in the country, and what he posited was, if only there was an alternative. Later in February, he essentially came up with an alternative, just noting that you have a choice, and one choice is to improve transit or not. And I always like this little footnote on the bottom right-hand side, which is disabled logic ahead if you think you want to fix the roads by killing mass transit. Not a good solution. So why is RTV a smart growth alternative? Well, for the future economic health of the county, and perhaps the best and least costly solution for good trends, it can help us attract new and young, well-educated workers and add jobs. It can expand our commercial tax base. It can provide revenues for county services and sustain and enhance the quality of life for our residents. Let me ask, well, how will it do that? Well, the Washington Council of Governments forecasts approximately 1 million new jobs in the region over the next 2 decades. They're currently forecasting that Montgomery County will claim about 16%, or 163,000 of those net new jobs. Fully 80,000 of those 160,000 jobs are located within recently approved county master plan areas, including White Flint, Shady Grove, Great Seneca, and Germantown. And those plans, at least 2 of them, are, as Marilyn pointed out, are explicitly conditioned on having transit. And obtaining the jobs and the expanded tax base for these plans is contingent on getting that mass transit to these smart growth communities. So very simply stated, no transit network means the lost opportunity to create as many as 80,000 jobs, or half of the county's projected net new jobs in the next 20 years. And the RTV system will provide transit capacity. Without the system, this planned job growth will be materially compromised. The remaining 80,000 jobs not in new planned areas today are in places like the FDA, which will also need transit. So this is not simply sort of a CCT issue. It's how do we also address White Flint as a job growth area? How do we address FDA as a job growth area? And by attracting these new jobs and younger workers, especially in the well-paid life science and healthcare sector, and by connecting residents to their places of work, the RTV system can solve many of our mobility problems and create major economic benefits for the county. To the end, we think the choice is quite clear. We know that economic growth in the region will occur in the next 20 years. This is Washington. It will occur. The real question is whether or not Montgomery County will cede our share of the growth to and the related economic health and quality of life to Northern Virginia, as has happened over the last 10 years. And this large growth is very contingent on the county's decision to support this countywide RTV system. We know that the county will grow in part, but we also look at limited growth as equating to weaker economic health and a diminished future quality of life. That if there are no new alternative RTV transit system and no expansion of the transportation capacity, that will lead to a lost opportunity for jobs, resulting in eroding commercial tax base, a stagnant or declining older population and fewer young people, and either reduced quality of life or materially higher taxes for county residents. On the other hand, planned smart growth, and we said earlier that these plans are in effect and they're transit oriented, but the transit part's missing. By doing that, it equates to stronger economic health and enhanced future quality of life. It can reduce traffic congestion by providing an alternative. It's not the cure-all solution for everything, but it provides an alternative, which is the least costly way to significantly increase transportation capacity. And least costly, I know Mark will probably cover this later, but when you look at the Silver Line, $250 million a mile, and looking here, something closer to $25 million a mile. So we talk about least costly. We think of this as very least costly. It can potentially add 80 to 160,000 more jobs in existing county-approved master plan locations, linking transit jobs and housing. It can help attract a younger, well-educated new population, and most importantly, develop an expanded commercial tax base in the county-approved smart growth plan areas like FDA and White Oak, White Flint, Great Seneca, et cetera, with the result being that it can provide an enhanced quality of life for Montgomery County residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDonough. Mr. Chairman?
Mr. President, members of the council, thank you, David, very much for that presentation. In the interest of time, I'm going to conclude our presentations with a few very brief comments about the balance of a long report, and of course not do justice to it as a result. But there are a number of other issues addressed in our report. We've touched on them to some extent, including the capacity that is created by the development of this system, and also other benefits to the community, including environmental benefits and the like. Ultimately, these things always turn on cost once we cross the threshold of agreeing that there is a need, and such is the case here. The task force used a variety of sources to develop capital cost and operating cost estimates. The important caveat here is to understand that until concrete, no pun intended, concrete design is actually commenced, it's impossible for anyone to give precise estimates about what the development of such a system will cost. I'll be happy to respond to questions about this in great detail or to follow up with explanatory memoranda to the council in the interest of time. But suffice it to say that the task force was careful of the methodology it used, realizes there is some controversy over whether or not the projected capital costs are correct, but believe our methodology was reasonable and believe that the capital cost estimate of $1.825 billion contained in the task force report for capital cost is reasonable. Likewise, with respect to operating costs, we utilized ultimately as the benchmark for operating costs a cost per mile based on the experience of other jurisdictions in operating bus rapid transit corridors in circumstances where the actual number of miles developed was relatively small. The systems were relatively short. Nothing that was used in developing these operating cost estimates was derived from any system in the United States that would be anything like the scope of what is proposed to be developed here, even the first phase of that development. And therefore, we believe that the average cost per mile laid out in our report is probably an overstatement of what the average cost per mile will be. However, given that that's an opinion and that's art, and there is no science to support that conclusion, the task force nonetheless used the $1.1 million per mile per year figure. We believe that that number can be improved upon, not only because of the economies of scale, but also because of the potential economies that can be achieved in alternative ways to procure goods and services that we've discussed in our report as well with regard to the development and operation of this system. Finally, with regard to the ultimate question, always sensitive to the members of this body, how to pay for this, we proposed a combination of approaches. Some have been used in different situations before, and some are somewhat unique. Essentially, we are proposing the creation of a financing plan which will use a combination of state and local resources to build and operate the system. I want to footnote, punctuate a particular point here. We would all love there to be more federal resources available for the funding of transportation infrastructure. And in many respects, it's irresponsible that there are not more federal resources available. However, given the number of projects sponsored by the state that are in place now competing for scarce federal resources, given the length of time it takes for such applications to work their way through the federal process, whether it be new starts, small starts, Tiger grants and loans, or any other alternative federal approach, the task force concluded, reluctantly in many ways, that we must move ahead with the development of a financial plan that for this particular transit asset was not dependent on federal funding alone. Now, this does not mean that we're not going to pursue it. It does not mean that there may not be ways in the future to obtain it, but it means that in order to move ahead with the development of even portions of this system in a time frame in which we control our own destiny, we cannot rely on that source of funding. Secondly, with regard to the state, we also recognize that the culprit here, fundamentally, is the state's failure to replenish the depleted State Transportation Trust Fund. And as my longtime friend, Mr. Bennett, indicated, this has to be one of the priorities of our entire community, notwithstanding which particular projects in which we may have the most interest, because all of these projects are essential to the improvement of our community, and in the long run, we have to stabilize and recapitalize the state's Transportation Trust Fund. One of the things the task force realized in observing the financial condition of the Transportation Trust Fund, and one of the things, frankly, that I observed personally back in the 90s when I served as chair of the State Transportation Commission and Advisory Group to the Governor and Secretary of Transportation, was the remarkable level of leverage that the state obtains in the development of its transportation infrastructure. And by remarkable, I mean minuscule. And our innovative step, to the degree that the task force might be viewed as having developed an innovative financing plan, our innovative proposal is to ask the state to look hard at the way in which it supports these kinds of programs and projects, and to leverage its available capital by assisting the county in leveraging its capital to develop the system. So that when you look at our financing plan, it is a combination of a state contribution and local special taxing district revenues, which over time will contribute to the debt service coverage for the development of the full system. In particular, we ask the state to give support to this system. We propose in two discrete areas. First, with regard to the capital cost of the development of the CCT, because that has been to date a state project. And secondly, to add an additional share of defraying the capital costs, but only after the Purple Line's funding has been complete and the development of the Purple Line is complete, at least on its current schedule, which contemplates a 2020 completion date. So that we have tried to take into account the need for greater leverage and the need to realize that there are a variety of competing resources. But the competition, in our view, should not be among a series of meritorious transit projects that benefit our community. What we should do is focus on the real problem, which is getting the state to meet its obligations to us and to the other local communities in the state to help us all produce the necessary transportation infrastructure. With that, vast oversimplification of a long and boring section of our report, Mr. President, I know on behalf of my colleagues, I appreciate having had the opportunity to be here, and we're happy to do our best to respond to any questions that the council may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you so much for your work. Before I turn to my colleagues, I want to turn to Mr. Street, because this was a task force of the county executive. I will say publicly, as I had said privately, I was a skeptic, quite frankly, of this task force, notwithstanding that I was asked to serve on it, because I was afraid that it actually would slow us down in the pursuit with respect to this important initiative. And I am pleased to say how mistaken I was with respect to that assessment and of the value that you have all played in making sure that we think about this in an appropriate way and put before us something that will allow us, I believe, to move forward with what will be a transformative project that really will change the way people think about Montgomery County forever if we seize this opportunity. But Mr. Street, this was a creature of the county executive, and the county executive is yet to opine, if you will, with respect to the work of the task force. Would you care to share with us your thoughts as to when we might hear from the county executive and his recommendations, notwithstanding the good work of the task force with respect to phasing and financing and other aspects of this particular initiative?
Thank you, Mr. Council President. Tom Street, Assistant Chief Administrative Officer and the County Executive's Liaison to the Transit Task Force. As Mr. Leggett said at the press conference in which the report was transmitted to him, he is completely supportive of this initiative and believes it is the future of the county. He has directed staff, our Department of Transportation, our Finance Department, and OMB, as well as his offices, to develop a set of recommendations for him. And I believe that within the next several weeks, we will be meeting with him, and he will transmit his recommendations to this council regarding how to proceed, not only in the interim year of fiscal 13, but for the future.
Thank you, Mr. Street.